Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing fantastic today. I'm filming this on February 13th, so it is the day after Chinese New Year and the day before Valentine's Day. So a belated Lunar New Year to those of you who celebrate, and an early Valentine's Day to all of you. So in the spirit of Valentine's Day, I'm coming to you today with a list of 5 favorite fictional couples. Last year I did a list of favorite literary couples. Now I'm just doing fictional couples. I find that different couples from different types of media inspire me in different ways, so it felt a bit too restrictive to just do bookish couples. So I could be talking about couples from shows or films or books. If you saw the video I did last year, then you might see a couple repeats from last year. And also the couples I'm going to be listing might not be favorite couples of all time. I feel like at different points of my life, I feel like different couples make a different impression on me. So the couples that I'm mentioning in today's video are more relationship dynamics that are inspiring me right now in terms of writing and character dynamics. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about 5 of my favorite fictional couples. And right out of the gate, let's talk about an old classic, Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy. This might seem like a bit of a cliche, but I feel like you just cannot go wrong with Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy. I recently rewatched the entire Pride and Prejudice BBC series with my boyfriend, and we did a whole video comparing different Pride and Prejudice adaptations. But during this rewatch, I did develop a new appreciation for this couple. Something I've always loved about Pride and Prejudice is that it is a love story, but at its heart, it's a very character-driven story. Both Lizzie and Mr. Darcy are going through their own separate character arcs, but they are inspired by each other to change and develop. Mr. Darcy is just one of those people who is socially awkward, but has to hide it because he has that kind of status that prevents him from just being himself and just being an introvert all the time. So he has to put out a front. And of course, that causes a lot of misunderstandings sometimes. And Elizabeth Bennet is kind of a contrast to him in many ways because she's always ready with a witty word or remark, and she's always very quick to make judgments about people. In fact, both of these characters are. And of course, through the events of the story, they have to change their minds about each other and also challenge their own preconceived notions about other people and the world around them. I know these two sort of pioneered the hate to love trope, but I think putting that trope label on them is almost too simplistic, because these are two people who genuinely challenge each other and challenge each other's preconceived notions. And I think that's one of the best kind of character dynamics that I love, whether it's between friends or people in a relationship or between a mentor and student. I like it when you have a believable pair of characters who contrast in some way, and they both cause each other to challenge a certain lie one or both of the characters believes about the world. And so why I always come back to this couple is that that is a very genuine example of that kind of character motivated change. And people put down Mr. Darcy for being this really moody character. I think when you watch the 1996 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, you kind of appreciate the fact that Mr. Darcy does have that very awkward side of himself. He does really struggle to find his words, and just socializing doesn't come easily to him. So when you understand that aspect of his character, it's much easier to sympathize with him. Like, he has to look like the most gentlemanly gentleman in the room when really he's like that nerd from every John Hughes film who kind of goes up to the girl he likes and then just runs away. So yeah, every time I revisit this couple, I feel like I get something else out of their relationship. Next up is a couple that you may not know as much about. I was actually introduced to this couple through C-drama watching. So the two people in this couple are called Donghua Dijon and Baifung. They first feature in a show called 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms. The English title is Eternal Love, which is really lame. And then there was a spin-off of that show show called Eternal Love of Dream, which is also a lame English translation. The real title is Three Lives, Three Worlds, The Pillow Book. I'm just gonna call it The Pillow Book, it's just the better title. I think both of these shows were based on novels by a writer called Tang Qigongzi. So basically the relationship between these two shows was that 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms was made before the makers of that show had the rights to the story Pillow Book that actually features Baifung and Donghua Dijon. So the one in 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms is sort of a fan fiction-y version of their story, whereas Pillow Book is the book accurate version of their relationship. So I think Donghua Dijon immediately appealed to me as a character when I first saw him in 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms. He is this sort of aloof god. He used to rule the world, but then he just kind of retired and gave his job to somebody else. Nobody knows where he comes from. He was probably born from a rock. So he has a very macroscopic view of the universe, like whether it's in harmony or not. He doesn't really concern himself with sort of human affairs or human type emotions like love. As far as I can see, he just kind of spends his days playing Go with other gods and reading and kind of telling the Lord of Heaven what to do. And then you enter Baifung, who is a young fox goddess. She's very feisty and lively, and she immediately falls in love with Donghua Dijon. So the version of their relationship in 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms is moving but incredibly flawed. Basically, Baifeng Zhou spends the entire time trying to make Donghua Dijun love her, and he kind of relents in the middle of the show to go down into the mortal world and live as a mortal for a little bit so that he can interact with Feng Zhou on a sort of human level. But he also has to go through a trial of experiencing human bitterness, which means Feng Zhou has to hurt him. And even though she doesn't want to, she ends up hurting him in such a way that it really overcomes him. He can't get through the rest of his trials. While a lot of their relationship was sort of going nowhere and was a little bit frustrating, that particular arc, I think, was incredibly satisfying and heartbreaking. And through that trial in the mortal world, he realizes he does have feelings for Feng Zhou. It's just that in the end, he still can't give her what she wants because there was a deal he made where he exchanged his ability to have any sort of relationship for the safety and harmony of the world. So a lot of the action in their arc sort of went nowhere, but they ultimately ended up in a different place. And I found the tragedy of their story actually quite moving. So I do like their relationship arc quite a bit better in the Pillow Book show. In that show, Feng Zhou does start out trying to get his attention as a servant and also in her nine-tailed fox form. But then none of that works, of course, because he's a god, and why would he notice these things? None of that worked, so she just goes back to being her old fox goddess princess self. And when she takes a trip to heaven as a fox princess, that's when he actually does notice her and appreciate her for who she is. And in that show, I like that over the course of their relationship, we see their power dynamic slowly equalizing. Like, their power dynamic inevitably starts out very skewed. He's an old-ass god who used to rule the universe, and she's some really young goddess who hasn't been around that long, and you know, she's very green, but she gets his attention because of her wit and her personality. There's also just some very contrived love drama where he has to go and save the world, but doesn't explain any of that to her when he pieces, and she misunderstands him and thinks he's abandoned her. Stuff like that just happens a lot in C-dramas. But then she ends up coming back to help him with the battle, which symbolizes their power dynamic equalizing. Now, a lot of that show, pacing-wise, was so flawed. Parts of it dragged so much. I ultimately liked the character dynamic between them because it was these two people finding a a balance in their relationship. They're people who like each other, but they cannot function when their power dynamic is skewed, so they have to equalize and ultimately help each other out when it counts. Like Fengjiu has to appreciate herself and know her own worth in a relationship, and Donghua Dijon has to learn to accept a woman in his life as an equal, not just someone he has to protect all the time. And he also has to learn how to open himself up to another person and be vulnerable, because he's just not accustomed to that as a god. So yeah, I do really love that couple. I wish more people did fan art for them. I wish more people appreciated them. Like when you see 10 Miles of Peach Blossom's artwork, it's all about Yehua and Baichen, and I'm like, I don't care that much about this couple. I want Donghua Dijun and Baifung. Next up is a couple you will definitely recognize from last year's list and probably won't be surprising to you if you've been following my YouTube videos. This next couple is Jo March and Professor Bear from Little Women. I'm aware that this couple isn't always the most popular among Little Women fans, but I always found Professor Bear so important to Jo's development in the story. They meet at a point in Jo's life where Jo is trying to make it big as a writer, so she's trying to put out all kinds of stories that are kind of scandalous and spicy and are a little bit trashy in a way. She doesn't necessarily enjoy putting out trashy fiction, and it actually makes her feel really bad. But then Professor Bear comes in as a very sophisticated older person who appeals to Jo because of his decency as a person and his intellectual prowess. And in the book, he doesn't directly criticize her writing. He does criticize that kind of genre writing for being essentially a fluff and not really enriching anybody's life. And while that seems like a very snobbish statement, I think it's very true to how Louisa May Alcott felt about that kind of fiction and having to write it. I mean, Jo, her own self-insert character, feels bad about writing that kind of fiction. It actually is really harmful for her state of mind. And Professor Bear, or Friedrich, comes in and encourages Jo to write authentically and to write the things that really inspire her. So that relationship is really important because it encourages Jo to push herself to improve her writing and also just write what is true to her, what is authentic to what's inside of her. And we all need relationships like that in our lives with people who push us to improve and make us think about things a little bit differently. And I like that Friedrich is her intellectual equal, and they kind of collaborate together to be productive individuals and be a productive couple. He comes back into her life at a point when she's really ready to have a family. She's so lonely because all of her sisters have moved out or have passed away. So she is ready to have family around her. She's not really sure how, and then he enters her life, and that is just the perfect culmination of their relationship. And for those of you who've been watching my channel for a long time, you probably know this is one of the big reasons why I highly disliked the Greta Gerwig interpretation of Little Women. In that adaptation, their relationship isn't really a thing. They reduce Friedrich's criticism of Jo's writing down to, oh, I don't like your writing. They don't show how Friedrich changes Jo or changes her outlook on her creativity. They just show him as some hot guy who criticizes her writing that one time. And that's just a highly reductive interpretation of their relationship. It's just like he's the guy who shoehorned in there for her to marry, when I don't interpret their relationship that way at all. I think it's much more profound than that and much more beautiful and moving. And it's not even like he holds her back from success either. I think in the sequels, she actually does become a famous writer. It's not like her life stops when Little Women ends. But yeah, I have to have this rant at least once a year. So yeah, Jo and Professor Bear. I think their relationship is valid and beautiful, and that we should all appreciate it a lot more. The next relationship I want to talk about is Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker from the Star Wars universe. I know a lot of people really don't like this relationship, and most of the time it's because they don't like the prequel films. I think a lot of direction or different direction from George Lucas might have helped bring out some of those writing and acting decisions. A lot of people think that Natalie Portman Portman and Hayden Christensen don't have chemistry, which I think is totally wrong. I think you can feel the chemistry from them pouring off of the screen in some of these scenes. So Padme and Anakin. Padme is a queen turned senator of her planet, and Anakin, when they come together again, is a slave turned Jedi. Their relationship is forbidden because Anakin is a Jedi and they do not encourage emotional attachments. In fact, they forbid long-term emotional attachments. My interpretation of what's going on Padme's side is that she's a professional politician and relationships often become liabilities. I always found their story really moving personally because I think these are two people who are so lonely and isolated in their situations in life. Padme has been in the political sphere pretty much her entire life, since she was a child. I think she became princess when she was 12. Padme does have close relationships, like with her handmaidens, but still the dynamic of those relationships are very much based around her position as a powerful person who needs protection. And later on when she's senator, when she interacts with people, it's always with people who want to make deals with her or are really just speaking to her as a politician. A lot of times they want something from her. So even though she is a person who rules from the heart, she does things from the heart, she really cares for the people that she works for, she's still quite emotionally detached. She never gets really emotionally involved because no one has ever been really authentic with her, and a lot of that really changes with Anakin. And the thing with Anakin is that he is an incredibly traumatized individual. He used to be a slave, and his life doesn't get that much better when he is accepted into the Jedi Temple. He was older than most beginning Jedi when he was accepted, so the council looks down on him, other people look down on him, his peers look down on him because he was a slave. He was forced to sever his attachment to his mother, which is so hurtful at that age, so he's a highly emotionally repressed individual. So when these two elements come together, they are finally able to be themselves and actually express themselves authentically to each other. Like, essentially, these are two very lonely individuals who crave attachment, who crave closeness, but have never allowed it for themselves in their lives. I always found them sort of alchemically balanced as a couple because Anakin's always so fiery and passionate and impulsive. Padme is more of the watery personality. She balances him out that way. She's more mellow and calming. But of course, in Revenge of the Sith, a lot of Anakin's insecurities come to a head. He does not want to lose control of the relationships in his life. He is just a character who does not cope well with loss, which I do not think he would, given how his mother died in a really horrible way. And his deep pathological desire for control is ultimately what destroys his relationship with the love of his life and causes him to be separated from his children until they're adults. So I do like the dynamic of their relationship a lot, and I also think the relationship is a great story of how lonely people just really come together out of need. Like, the love is true, but there's also a real need for intimacy. And I think it's also a story of how external malicious forces can manipulate all of the bad parts of one or even both individuals and really make everything go to pieces. Anakin has always been a person I viscerally identified with. I always could really identify with his story, how his emotional repression causes him to do very destructive things. And his story with Padme is just one where sometimes your fears are self-fulfilling if you buy into them enough, if you allow them to take over. So yeah, I think these two are the ultimate romantic tragedy. For me, I'm always really moved by their story. So my final couple on this list will not surprise anyone who's been following me on Twitter for the past few months, and that couple is Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji. They are from the show The Untamed, which was based on the web novel Mo Dao Zuxi. So Mo Dao Zuxi is a xianxia novel. It's a Chinese fantasy novel about cultivators. So cultivators in this universe are basically magicians. They have certain abilities that they start cultivating from a young age, and it gives them enhanced abilities, enhanced fighting abilities, abilities and they can do certain forms of magic. And at the center of this novel is a gay love story between the two main characters, Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji. And of course in the Untamed, because of Chinese media censorship, they could not explicitly be in a relationship, but the show did its best to deeply imply their relationship even without being explicit, which I think they did an excellent job. It was almost like the relationship was still there, it's just that there was no kissing or touching. Even without them being explicitly in a relationship, I thought this was one of the best written love stories I had ever seen on screen. I haven't read the novel, I definitely plan to sometime this year. So I'm speaking about the show The Untamed when I talk about the writing of this relationship. So Wei Wuxian is a very rebellious sort of character. He's kind of an upstart among cultivators, and he's kind of very curious about demonic cultivation or crafty tricks. And that's kind of the dark magic of this universe. He believes that dark magic can be used to do some good, and so he's always experimenting with it, and that kind of gets him in trouble with other clans and even with his own family clan. So in contrast, Lan Wangji was raised in a very strict rule-based clan, and they are very rigid and all about just being impassive. So he grows up following rules and living by a very strict way of life. But then he meets Wei Wuxian, and then that starts to rupture all of his preconceived notions about the orthodoxy of the cultivator world and how people love power even though they claim to be very moralistic about what you should do and not do when it comes to magic. And he observes how people treat Wei Wuxian, and he starts to see a lot of hypocrisy of the people that he grew up with and that he grew up surrounded by. So it's another one of those stories where you have two people who are very stubborn and have their own set of principles, but then are forced to challenge their own preconceived notions about the world, to challenge the lie they believe about the world. Like, if you want an analogy for their love story, it's kind of like if a Jedi fell in love with a Sith Lord, and the Sith Lord was a cocky flute player. I love their dynamic. I love that Wei Wuxian causes Lan Wangji to kind of challenge how he thinks about the world and actually become a bit of a rebel himself. And conversely, Lan Wangji is kind of this port of stability for Wei Wuxian. And through each other, they discover what they value the most in life, what's most important to them, and where their loyalties ultimately lie. But yeah, this was one of the best written couples I saw in 2020. I loved the progression of their relationship, how subtle it was, and how philosophical it was as well. But I think more relationships should be written like this, because then it would just be a lot more earnest and genuine. So those were my 5 favorite fictional couples. Comment down below with your favorite fictional couples. Remember to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram, and I will see you in my next video.